Hi, happy Christmas. Today we're going to make an interface for microtuning. We're not actually going to implement the microtuning functionality, we're just going to build out the UI, and in a future video we'll connect it up to a microtuning script. But this is going to be a fun little video and we're going to cover lots of different topics. We're going to cover factory functions, type safety, a little bit of broadcaster stuff, paint routines, look and feel, all that kind of thing. So I'll demonstrate what it's going to do and then we'll get into how to make it. So this is the UI, so you can control, you've got a little slider for every single note and you can shift the pitch up to 100 cents or down to minus 100 in increments of 5 cents. And there's a little reset button here. We've got this sort of vaguely looking piano grid behind it, just for a bit of visual interest. And we've also got this display in the top right corner there, which shows the current value, and we can see the value as well on the sliders, and that's above the slider when we're down here, and when we move it up it goes below the slider. Okay, so I'll play some notes and then we'll shift this around a bit. So you can hear it just shifts the tuning and allows you to create interesting scales. Okay, so let's open a new project and see how we build this out. Okay, so we're ready to get started. Let's just zoom out on here a bit and we're going to add a panel to our UI. Or let's bring over the widget list so we can see that. So we'll add a panel and we're going to call this PNL microtuning. And let's bring the properties up. We'll make this 500 by 500 and we'll just set it at 50 and 50 on the X and Y, so it's sort of central. And that's all we need for our UI. The naming is important, so I always prefix panels with PNL so that in other parts of my script, if I see that variable name PNL, I know instantly that it's a panel. And that will also become more important in this particular script that we're working on. So we're going to create a namespace. We'll call it microtuning panel. And we're going to select and highlight it, right click and go to move selection to external file. And we'll call this microtuning panel, same as the namespace, and we'll hit enter on that. And HISE automatically creates an include for that. So now we're working with this as an external file. And that's important because it means we can import this into other projects in the future. So we're going to create what's called a factory function. And this is useful for making, well, you can use it for all kinds of things, for object-oriented type programming. But what we're going to do is we're going to use it to create a kind of compound widget. So it's going to be a control on our UI that's made up of multiple controls. So in this case, it's going to include a panel, a slider pack and a button. But you can sort of make these compound widgets out of any of the basic components, and it's just a really cool way to expand the number of controls you have available to you. And doing it this way with a factory function allows it to be easily imported into another project, or if you want to create multiple versions of this control within the same project, you can do that as well. So factory functions are really useful. Okay, so the function is going to be called create. And it's going to take a few parameters. The first one is going to be a panel ID. So this is going to be the parent panel in which we put our compound component that we're making, our microtuning panel. So you don't have to do it this way, but I always like to do it this way so that you can place a component on your UI like we have here, and then it's going to be within this that our new component is created. And that's the way I found that I like to work. We're also going to pass in a width and a height, and this is going to be for our microtuning controls. And the way we're going to do this, the microtuning controls are going to be set up central to the parent panel. Okay, so one thing we're going to do that's a little different is we're going to use what's called type safety. And this is a newish feature in HISE, and it basically allows us to make sure that certain parameters that are being passed into our function and the return type of our function are of a specific type. So we can say we only want the width and height to be numbers don't try and pass in a string or an array or an object. And it just makes it a bit better for when you're sharing this code with other people, because it means if they try and pass in the wrong data type that the function won't work with, instead of it just not working and them not understanding why, they'll get an error message telling them they've tried to pass in the wrong data type. So if I open the HISE documentation, we can see, let's go and search for type safety, and we shall see what data types we have available, and then I'll show you how to use them. So this is a fairly recent feature, and there's a little tutorial there. So these are the data types we have: int, double, string, array, buffer, object with length, JSON, script object. So script object is things like component references, functions, numbers, colors, and color isn't just color values. You can use it for anything like hex values and stuff. It explains it here. I'll let you read that in your own time. Complex types are not undefined, so that's basically anything that's not an undefined value. So those are the ones that we have available. The ones I tend to use most are array, string, JSON, script object, and number. So I don't use int as much. Oh, we've got this one here as well, object. I don't use int or double. I tend to just use number, and this is kind of recommended here. It says, note, it's highly advisable to use this over elementary types. By elementary, it means the ones with elementary, so as the in the type column there. Okay, so those are the data types we have available. So for this function, we're going to return a script object. We're going to return a reference to our panel. So to specify that, we put a colon here, and then we write the data type. So script object. For the panel ID, we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to write string because we want this to be a string. For the width and height, we want those both to be numbers. So now if I call this function, let's just call it here. Oh, we've got to make sure it returns something as well. Otherwise, that script object thing will complain. So we'll call the function. And for the ID, I'll just put an empty string. For the width, I'm just going to put 1, and for the height, I'll put 2. This is just to demonstrate the type safety. So if I hit F5, we get an error. Why do we get an error? Return type illegal, expecting JSON. Okay, let's get rid of the return type for now because we're not actually returning a component reference. We're just going to get that error. Okay, so I hit F5 and it's all fine. But if I change 1 here to be a string instead of a number, and we hit F5, it now gives us an error, and it says illegal type string expected number. So it gives us that bit of information, that warning, so we know what we've done wrong. If we remove this so it doesn't say number there and hit F5, then the error goes away, but that means the user or whichever developer uses this function in the future might try and pass in a string, which is then not going to work with the rest of the function. So I've started using this type safety quite a lot when I'm making little module scripts like this that I expect other people might want to use in the future, or that I might come to in the future and forget the details of how it's meant to work. And it just is something else just to sort of remind me how to use my own code. Right, so I'll put that back there, a script object. And the first thing we're going to do in our factory function is get a reference to the panel that's being passed in. So we'll write local panel equals content.getComponent panel ID. And this is being stored in a local variable. So that means once this function exits, this panel reference no longer exists. So we're going to return that reference. And then when we call this function, we can actually store the panel in a const. So we could do const PNL microtuning equals microtuning panel dot create, and then we'd pass in the information that we want. So we can pass that in now actually. So the name of the panel is PNL microtuning. The width, let's do 300 by 200, and we can hit F5 there. So now we have a permanent const reference to this panel. So this one's temporary because it's a local and it only exists within the function. this one is more permanent. Okay, so the next component we're going to add to this compound microtuning panel component is a slider pack. So the slider pack is actually the thing that's doing all the magic. So those little lines I was moving up and down, those are all, they're just sliders in a slider pack, which I've styled with look and feel. So we're going to add a slider pack. So I'll put that here. And something I'm doing here, which I don't usually do, is I'm just giving the variables generic names like panel, slider pack, button. Usually I'd give them the same name as the control, but because we don't know what that control is going to be called, it could be called anything. Just in this case, it's P&L microtuning. I've just used these generic names within this function. So we're going to write content.addSliderPack. And for the name, we're going to take the panel ID, but we're going to replace the PNL with SLP. So SLP is the prefix I use for slider packs. And for the position, we'll just put 0, 0. We're going to reposition it later on. Now we need to set some properties for the slider pack. So the first thing is to set the parent component so that the slider pack will be within the panel. So I'll write .set parent component. And then we'll just pass in the panel ID. Then we're going to set the position. So right, set position, and we want it to be central to the panel. So the X is going to be the panel's width divided by 2. And from that we're going to subtract the width we passed in, which we also divide by 2. And then for the height, we're going to do the panel's height. We want it to be central again, so we're going to do the panel's height basically the same as we've done for the width. So panel.getHeight divide by 2 minus the height that we've passed in divided by 2. And then for the width and height, it's just going to be the width and height that we've passed in. Right, we might adjust that slightly in a little while, but that's where it's going to be for now. The next thing we need to set is the default value. We're going to set that to 0. And then we need to set the minimum and maximum. So the minimum is going to be -100, and the maximum is going to be +100. And the step size is going to be 5. You could set that to anything you want. You could set it to 1 if you wanted. But I find 5 is a good value there. Okay, and that's the basic setup for the slider pack. So now when I press F5, a slider pack should appear within our panel. And there we go, and it's central. Now we haven't applied a look and feel here, and the slider pack is, well, sometimes behaves a bit weirdly when it's bipolar, but no, it's behaving just fine. So that's our slider pack, and we are going to style that so it takes on the appearance we want, but for now that's pretty good. Okay, the next thing we're going to add is the reset button. So we'll add that here. So we can just call this btn reset actually. So we can use the btn prefix if we want, and I have decided I'm going to. And it's going to be content.addButton. Let's just move that down a bit so we can see that. I'll add a few empty lines. There we go. And the name, we're going to do the same trick we did with the slider pack. We're going to use the panel ID, replace PNL with BTN. And the position will be 0, 0. We'll position it properly afterwards. So again, we're going to set the parent component to be the panel. We're going to set the text to be reset. We'll set is momentary. Ooh, I've done that wrong. There we go. Is momentary, that's going to be set to true so that it's not a toggle button, it's just a momentary button. And save in preset will be false. And then we're going to position it. So we're going to position it at the slider pack's X position and the slider pack's Y position. That should be .getX. Let me change that. There we go. So the Y position, but we're going to subtract 18 from it. So basically it's going to put it at the top left corner of the slider pack. And we're going to make it 40 wide and 16 high. So we'll hit F5 on that. Okay, so we've got an error. Parent component can't be found if I misspelled that. Oh, it's called panel ID, not parent ID, that's why. There we go, and there's our little reset button there. Let's zoom in on that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add functionality to our reset button. So when we click it, we want the slider pack to be all zeros. And usually we'd do this with a control callback, but that won't work in this case. So if I was to write a control callback, well, let's try it. Let's see what would happen. So if I did btn reset.set control callback on btn reset control, and then we were to declare our control callback. So we're going to get an error as soon as I hit F5 here. So it said no, as soon as I click on it, it's gone. We've got it down here. No nested inline functions allowed. So we are inside an inline function called create, and we can't declare another inline function within this one that we're in. So I would have to take it out of here and put it outside. And now this would work. So we could do this, and I could call the function. Like I could assign it from here. If I hit F5, we won't get an error. That works, and it will trigger this function. But the problem is this function doesn't know about the existence of the slider pack, which is the thing we need to reset. And there's no real way to get that slider pack into the function to reference it, other than storing the slider pack in an external variable somewhere and then referencing it from within this function. But that makes everything no longer self-contained. So what we're going to use instead is a broadcaster, and this will just keep everything declared within that single inline function, and we won't need the control callback. So we're going to use a value change broadcaster, which is very similar to a control callback. And we'll create it using the built-in broadcaster wizard. So for the ID, we'll just call it reset button. And it's going to be on the value. And I don't know if this will come up because it's only a local variable. Let's see. Well, just let me put it in. If this was a const, it would probably come up with a suggestion in here, but as long as it lets me put it in, that's fine. And we just want it to have a callback, which is, like I say, it's very much like a control callback. And click next. For this object, we're going to pass in slider pack. Now, this object is a confusing thing. It's not very descriptive of what it is, and this doesn't really help very much. So I'm not going to explain it right now. I'm going to explain it once we've got the broadcaster set up and you can see it in action, and hopefully I'll make it a bit easier to see what's going on. The metadata, we just give a little description of what this thing does. So it resets the slider pack. And then that's what it's going to give us. We're going to click finish, and it's copied it to the clipboard. So now I can just paste it here. And we can tidy this up a bit. We don't need this tags thing, so we'll just delete that. So this is the broadcaster definition. And we don't want it to be a const because we can't have a const here. We actually, well, I'll make it a local for now. We're going to change that, but we'll have it as a local for now. So we're creating our broadcaster. And I'm just going to put it all on one line because there's no need for it to spread out onto multiple lines. So our broadcaster is called reset button. I'm going to change that to be called BC reset button because I like using prefixes so I can recognize what things are in different parts of my code without having to find where they were declared. So if I put BC, I know it's a broadcaster because that's the prefix I use for broadcasters. So here we're attaching it to the component value. So this is basically the same as setting a control callback. And it's put it in parentheses here, square brackets, because you can attach it to multiple components at the same time if you wanted. I don't actually want to set it to the ID of a component though. I want to set it to this specific instance of the component, this variable here, because we don't know what the button's going to be called. We know it's not going to be called BTN reset because it's going to be called BTN microtuning in this case. So it's no good having the ID here. We want to set it to this particular variable name. So I'm going to get rid of the square brackets and I'm going to get rid of the quotation marks. So now it's set to this particular instance of this button. And then we're attaching the listener, and this is basically the callback function, just like you'd have with a control callback. You can see we've got component and value there, so it's no different to a control callback, except we're passing in the slider pack. So now if we want to do things to the slider pack, we can do. We have access to it within this function, which we didn't have with the control callback. So this is this variable that I mentioned earlier. Now, often you won't need this for things, so you'll just put 0 or empty curly braces. It doesn't really matter, but whatever you put here can be referred to within the callback using the this keyword. So that's what the this object is. It's just whatever you pass in, you can put this there. So if we put BTN reset here, then this now refers to BTN reset. But we're going to have it as slider pack so we can access the slider pack. And all we're going to do, we're going to check the value of the button. So we're going to say if value, that's also if the button's on, then we're going to reset the slider pack. So this, remember, refers to the slider pack dot set all values 0. So dot set all values is a slider pack function. You can have a look at that over here, set all values, and there it is, set all values. So that's just a function that's specific to slider packs. So if I hit F5 on this and we draw something there, now when I hit the reset button, it should trigger this listener, which should reset the slider pack. The other great thing about using broadcasters like this is we haven't used the control callback. So if later on you also want to assign a control callback to the button, you can do that, and you can still connect the button up through parameter and processor ID. Where is it? There we go, processor ID, parameter ID. If you wanted to connect it to other modules through the property editor, you can do that, and this broadcaster will still work. So it's really useful for just extending the functionality of things. Okay, but we do have one problem here, and that's this local variable only exists within the scope of our inline function. So it means basically if we try to create multiple microtuning panels, we're only going to get a broadcaster added to the last one, because each new call to this create function will overwrite the previous broadcaster. So the solution to this is, instead of storing the broadcaster just in a local variable, we store it in a const. And we're already storing a const here. We're storing the panel, which we're getting from this function. So what we can actually do is we can store our broadcaster within the panel. So the panel has a data object, which you can put pretty much anything in. And we're going to do panel.data.bc reset button. And that way it stores it within the panel. So it's more permanent and it won't be overwritten by subsequent creations of subsequent calls to the create function. So that's it. I hit F5 and the functionality should still be exactly the same. And if we open the broadcaster map, turn it on, we can see our broadcaster here. So there's our reset button. And it's called BTN microtuning, but we didn't tell it was called BTN microtuning. We just passed in BTN reset, which is the name of our variable. But it knows that that's a reference now to this. And it resets the slider pack. That's the metadata that we added here. Resets the slider pack, so we can see there, resets the slider pack. And this object is SLP microtuning because we passed in the slider pack there. And then when we hit the button, we should see this light up. So the broadcaster map is really useful for sort of seeing what's going on. One downside to broadcasters is that, especially if you're using a lot of them, you can end up with seemingly unrelated bits of code affecting each other, and it's kind of hard to figure out why one thing is being affected unless you know that it's being affected by a broadcaster. So the broadcaster map is really useful for getting an overview, and you can see how the bits of code link together. So that's probably the only downside to broadcasters, is they reduce readability in that way. But generally, I mean, in something like this, it's really straightforward because the broadcaster it's all connected. Like the component that's being affected by the broadcaster is next to the broadcaster. But sometimes you'll have them in totally separate namespaces in different script files, and it can be a bit confusing to figure out what's going on. Okay, so we're going to do something else similar to this. So where we're putting the reset button in the panel's data, we're also going to do that with the slider pack. So we're going to have panel.data.sliderpack equals slider pack. So we're storing the slider pack in the panel's data object as well. So the reason we're doing this is so that we have access to the slider pack within the panel's paint routine, which is the next thing we're going to do. We're going to create the paint routine for our panel. So I'm just going to hit F5. I'm going to save this, make sure everything is kept safe and sound. Okay, so we're going to create a paint routine for our panel. So panel.setPaintRoutine function G, and we can declare this within the inline function because this is a function, not an inline function. So you can't nest inline functions within inline functions, but you can just do a normal function like this. So we're going to get the area of the panel into a variable. This.getLocalBounds. And now we need to know the note names. So we're going to draw the note names along the bottom of the slider pack. So we just need an array of all the note names, and I'm not going to type that out because I've already done it. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in, but obviously that's easy enough to type out. And then we're going to check that the slider pack has been declared properly. So if not is defined, I can't spell today. There we go. This.data.sliderpack. So if the slider pack hasn't been added to the panel's data property for whatever reason, maybe it's the first time we've called this function, so it hasn't happened yet, then we're just going to return. So the next thing to do is set up the width, the height, the X and the Y position where we want to draw each of the individual nodes. So we'll start with the width. We're going to put that into a variable called W, and that's going to be equal to this.data.sliderpack.getWidth divided by the number of nodes, so that's nodes.length. So we're taking the width of the panel and we're dividing it by 12 because we have 12 nodes. And that will give us the width of one of these sliders. Then for the height, and this is the height of the slider pack that we want, so it's going to be this.data.sliderpack.getHeight, and you'll see why we need that in a minute. Then we want the X position of the slider pack, and we want the Y position of the slider pack. Okay, and then we're going to set the font, and we'll just set it to Oxygen. I think that's one that's installed. And I'll set that font size to 14, and for the colour we're going to set it to the panel's text colour, which I don't think we've assigned a text colour yet, but we can do that afterwards. And then we're going to have a little loop that just loops over all of the notes in the notes array. And it's just going to, so we're looping over all of these notes and we're just going to draw each one in turn. So draw a line text, note I, and then for the X and the Y and the width and the height, so the X position is going to be X plus W times I. So X is the left hand side of the slider pack, W is the slider pack's total width divided by 12, and then I is our index here, so we're taking the left hand side, we're adding 1/12 of the whole width multiplied by whichever note we're up to. So that's basically going to progress us from left to right. Okay, for the Y position, it's going to be Y plus H, so we're taking the Y is the top position of the slider pack plus H, the height of the slider pack. And then for the width, that's just going to be, oh, I've done something there. There we go. For the width, that's just going to be W. And for the height, we're going to do 25. So this is just the height of the text. The alignment is going to be centered. So I'll hit F5 and we should see the numbers appear along here. Got a typo somewhere. Line 15. All right, okay, I've got an extra parenthesis there. All right, hit F5. And there we go, we can see the letters have appeared across there. We haven't set the text color of the panel, so it's just using whatever the default is. So if we set that to bright red and hit F5, the text is now going to be bright red. So I think in my original one, I set it to a light gray, something like that. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, and that's it for the paint routine for the panel. So the next thing to do is to style the slider pack. So we're going to do that using look and feel. Okay, so we go down here and there are quite a few look and feel functions for the slider pack. We're not going to use them all today. So the first one is, well, let's create our look and feel object first of all. So let's call this LAF. Actually, let's make that a bit more descriptive. LAF slider pack, so we know what it's for. And that's going to be equal to content.create local look and feel. And then we're going to assign it to our slider pack. So slider pack.set local look and feel. LAF slider pack. And now we can, I've hit F5, so hopefully the autocomplete will help us here. So slider pack dot, I want register function, is it going to come up? Sometimes the autocomplete completely fails when it comes to doing this. Sometimes it works. I'll just hit F5 a couple of times, maybe it'll work, we'll see. If not, I'll just have to do it manually. So hit F5, hit escape. No, it's not working. Okay, so we'll do it manually. So register function, and the first function is draw slider pack background. That takes a function with G and OBJ, and we're not actually going to populate this one, we're just going to leave it as an empty object because we don't need to draw the background of our slider pack. But we put it there anyway to make sure it empties out the background. So let's just comment that out and hit F5 so you can see the difference. If I hit F5, you can see it's got this outline there. We don't want that outline. So we remove that and it's gone. Okay, so now we need another one. And this one is going to be draw slider pack pop-up. Sorry, draw slider pack text pop-up. Takes the function G OBJ. And this one we are going to populate. So the slider pack pop-up is this thing in the top right corner there. And I just want it to be a simple black background with a number. I don't need anything more complicated than that. But you do get quite a bit of information in the object. So let's just have a look at that. So you may want to do something more complicated in your own design. So it's good to know what's available. Line 41, we got an error. It's not surprising since I had to type this out manually because the autocomplete failed me. Yeah, I think that's okay now. Yeah, right. So let's see what data we get. So we get the ID of the slider pack. We get the background color, item color, text color, etc. Index, this is the index of the slider that was moved. And the value, the area of the slider pack, but this is the area of the entire slider pack, not just that slider. And the text, which it displays by default up here, but we're not going to use the text, we're just going to use the value and draw our own text. Okay, so I want it to appear in the top right corner. So for our area, we're going to have obj.area2, and we're going to subtract 37 from that. So that's the entire width of the slider pack minus 37. For the Y, we're just going to go with the slider pack's Y position plus 2. So that's 2 from the top of the slider pack. We'll make it 35 wide. So because we've subtracted 37 and we're adding 2 here, it means it's going to be 2 down from the top and 2 in from the right. And for the height, we're going to add, set that to 15, yeah. Then we'll do g.setColor, obj.bgColor. So this should be the background color of the slider pack from the settings here. So this one, and we'll set it to a nice dark color with a bit of opacity, a bit of transparency even. There we go. And we'll just fill in a rounded rectangle. So that'll be A, and I'll put 2 for the corner size. G.setFont. Now I'm going to set this to Oxygen. It won't be aligned quite right because this font doesn't align vertically. It doesn't center it properly. So I would recommend you use a different font, but I don't want to go messing around with fonts today. So we'll just go with Oxygen and live with the misalignment. But we know why it's misaligned. It's not because we're doing anything wrong. It's because of the font. So g.setColor, obj.textColor, then g.drawLineText. And we want to take the value which was given here, which has a decimal point and a number after it. We want to round that, so we're going to use parseInt, which will just round it down. And then we're going to put obj.value. And for the area, we'll put A. And for the text, it's going to be centered. For the alignment, it's going to be centered. So I'll hit F5. And has that gone right? Yeah, it's coloured the background in there, which I am not sure that was meant to happen. But we'll figure that out later. But we get our number appearing here. Yeah, up in the top corner. So we'll hit F5, we'll save. And now we'll move on to the next one. So there is another function that I don't think we need to use, which is the flash overlay. So there's a thing on slider packs where you can have them flash when one of the sliders is active, and the flash, it's draw slider pack flash overlay. If you use that one, you can customize it with look and feel, but we don't need it, so I'm actually just going to turn it off here, and we're just not going to use that. So the next one is the draw linear slider. So this is the same look and feel function you would use just to draw normal sliders, but you can apply it to slider packs as well to style each individual slider. Okay, so we get some quite useful info in the object for this one. So let's have a look at that. So we get the usual slider stuff. We get the area of the slider, the ID, is it enabled, the text. That's just the text of the entire slider pack. All this is usual slider stuff. Yeah, you get all this with the slider, but there is one thing we get. Where is it? Have I gone past it? Yeah, it's this. It's the ID that I wanted. That actually gives us the index of the slider so that we can style each slider differently. And that also reminds me of something. We have our slider pack set to have 16 sliders. I wonder if any of you noticed this, but we only need 12 sliders because we only have 12 notes. So we should actually set that here. Slider pack.set slider amount, and that should be 12. Okay, so the ID is what we're going to use to know which slider we're actually working with. Why is it still saying 15? Let's check that again. 15. I'll just comment this out and we'll have a look. We'll see if it actually has 15 or if it has 12 as it should have. No. Okay, so we'll just try deleting both of these controls, and then when they're recreated, hopefully it'll be recreated with the right amount of sliders. There we go. So yeah, it's just one of those weird, quirky things. Right, so we can get back to our look and feel. Okay, so for the area, we're just going to use the area that's given to us because that's just the area of each individual slider. We're going to have a radius to give us a bit of rounding for each of the little, I don't know what we'll call them, the little lines that we're going to draw that we get to move around. So we'll set that to 1. We're going to have the height of each of those little lines is going to be 2. And the Y position for each of them. Okay, so for the Y value, we have to do a little bit of clever maths, and we're going to do a simple version now, and it's not going to work fully, but it's just so you can see how I get to the final version. So for the Y position, we can start by taking the height of the slider and multiplying it by the normalized value. So that's value normalized. So the normalized value basically takes the range of the slider, so minus 100 to plus 100, and converts it to a range of 0 to 1. So that's what it means when you see normalized. It means it's a range of 0 to 1. So we're just going to take that and take the height of the slider and multiply it. So if the slider is in the middle, that's 0.5. So you multiply the height by 0.5 and you get the middle of the slider. So that's how that works. We want to know if these notes are black notes or white notes, or black keys or white keys on your keyboard, so that we can draw the background appropriately. So we're going to use a little clever hack here to figure out if it's a black note or a white note. So we're going to make an array with 1, 3, 6, 8 and 10 in it. And these correspond to the keys that are black, starting from C being 0. So C is 0, so 1, C sharp, that's a black key, so we put 1 here. D, that's 2, that's a white key, so we don't put anything. D sharp, that's going to be 3, and that's a black key, so we put that here, and so on, so we get all the black keys, so 5 numbers in here. So that's what those numbers refer to, they're the black keys, or the indexes of the black keys. So we're going to see if it contains 60 plus parse int obj.id mod 12. Right, so that's a bit of a long-winded thing. So 60 is middle C. We could use any of the C's for this, but we could use 48 or whatever the other keys are, 36 I think, 72, that are a C, but I always remember that 60 is a C. And then we're adding on to it obj.id, which is the index of the slider, as we saw. So where is it? There we go. So the ID gives us the index of the slider. And then we're doing the modulo operator, which divides it by this number but returns the remainder. Basically, we're saying if the key is, if this result is one of the things in this array. So that's why we're using the contains function there. So we're saying, does this array contain the result of this nonsense here? And if it does, then it must be a black key, so this will be true, and if it isn't a black key, then this will be false. So that's all we're doing. We're just finding out if the index is a black key or a white key. So then we'll do g.setColor, colors.withAlpha, and we're going to say is black question mark, and if it is, we're going to use black, otherwise we're going to use white. And we'll set the opacity to something like 0.03. And we'll do g.fillRect. And I'll put the area in there, and we'll hit F5. So now we're getting a background there. Let me just increase this opacity just so I can check what's going on, because that should be black and white, and clearly it's not. So there's some miscalculation here. All right, yeah, okay. So the miscalculation is we need to put this in parentheses, the 60 plus the index, because it's this total value that we want to run the modulo on. So it was just those missing parentheses, I think. So let's hit F5. Yes, now we get our black and white, and we can change this back to 0.03. There we go. That's a bit too subtle, isn't it? Let's make it a bit brighter. There we go. Okay, so the next thing to do is to draw our little lines. So for that, we're going to use item color 2. And we're going to fill a rounded rectangle. So for the area, we're going to put A0. For the Y, we're going to put Y, so that's the value here, which remember I said it won't quite work properly, so we'll sort that out later. We're going to put A2, and for the height we'll put H, which we've got here as well, so that's just a value of 2. For the corner size, that's just how rounded we want it to be. I'm going to put our radius there, which we've set up here to 1. So I'll hit F5 and we should see a bunch of little lines up here. Now if I click and drag one of these down, you can see it goes up. And if I push it up, it goes down. And you'll also notice it hits the top there, but it goes out of the screen, it goes off the end of the bottom. So this is caused because the top of our slider pack, the Y position of it is 0. So it's not the bottom that's 0, it's the top that's 0. And when we draw, we're drawing from the top down. So what we have to do, the first step, is rather than just taking the height and multiplying it by the normalized value, we have to actually take the height and subtract the height multiplied by the normalized value. So that will solve the first bit. So now when I go up, it's going to go up. Can you see we're getting that flash? It is doing that flashy thing, which I turned that off, so I'm not sure why it's doing that, but actually I quite like it, so I might just leave it on. If we wanted to get rid of that, I guess we could implement that look and feel function, and maybe we will. But yeah, so the sliders are going up now when I go up, and they're going down when I go down, but when I get to the bottom, it's still getting cut off. So the reason it's getting cut off is because of the height parameter. So our height is 2, and it's going down here, and just the calculation just means it gets cut off, but we can still see a little bit of it. So if I change this to, say, 6, and I drag it down, we still only see the little bit of it. It's going off the edge. And it's because it's drawing from the top of our slider, not from the bottom of our slider. So yeah, so that's the problem there. So actually I'm going to make these 4. I think a little chunkier is nicer. Yeah. Okay, so we need to adjust this calculation. So the first thing we have to do is, from the end of this, we have to subtract our height. So now let's see what happens. So now we can see it sits at the bottom nicely. But now when we go to the top, now it goes off at the top. So we have the opposite problem. So to fix it going off at the top, we have to add the height. So yeah, we've subtracted it, now we're adding it. But this one that we're adding, we're going to multiply by obj.value normalized. Okay, so yeah, so we're adding the height after we subtracted it, but we're multiplying that result by the normalized value. So now when we go to the top, it doesn't go off, and when we go to the bottom, it doesn't go off. So it just confines the visible range. This sort of thing is really useful for any time you're drawing a vertical slider. Okay, now we've got the background drawn the way we want. We can see our little overlay there. I'm not seeing the background on it, which is concerning. We'll have to check that out. We didn't actually set any of these colors for the, what did we use? Item color 2. We didn't set that, but that seems okay, but we could change that. So item color 2, let's do a blue color. There we go, that'll make Morpheus happy. He likes pink and purples. So there's that. So the next thing to do is just draw the little text labels above or below each one. So we're going to set our font. And we'll set it to a small size. And now we need a Y position for the text label. So that's going to be obj.value normalized. And we're going to say, is it greater than 0.5? Oh, let me just get rid of that. So is it below the halfway point? Because if it is, we want to draw it above the slider. Or if the slider's greater than the halfway point, we're going to draw it below the slider. So that's all this is doing. And we're going to say, if it is going to be the Y, which is the position of our slider currently, plus 8. Otherwise, it's going to be Y subtract 8. Or minus 8. And we just need to put a question mark there. So that gives us the Y position for our text. We might need to adjust that slightly, but we'll see. And then we're going to draw the text, which is going to be obj.value as text. And for the area, we're going to use A0, Y, A2, H. We might need to increase the height. We'll see. And for the text, for the alignment, it's going to be centered. And we'll hit F5 on that. And yeah, let's just increase that slightly. So instead of 8, let's try 10. There we go. And we haven't actually set the color here. We could set that to the text color. And let's change the text color. Ah, that's nice. Like a fruit salad. Okay. One of the benefits of using a slider pack as well is if we right click and drag, we get these this line. So that's a nice feature. I think again we can turn that off. Oh, maybe not. I thought there was a way to turn it off. Flash active is enabled. Oh yeah, it's because we recreated the slider pack, so that's why. Show value overlay. Yeah, we want that on. Okay. So I'm missing my background on the overlay, so let's just check what's going on there. So it is being drawn. Slider pack text pop-up, yeah, it's being drawn there. Oh, again, it's because we recreated the panel and I forgot to change these properties again. Not the panel, sorry, the slider pack. So now, there we go, there, I've got my background back. Although now the black clashes a bit with that, that text color. Let's try something like that. There we go. Okay, so that's the UI for the microtuning part. We just need to style this button now, and that's a really simple one. Or one other thing we can do, I don't like it where it says 0 here, so let's just make it so it only draws the text if there's a value to actually draw. So we'll just put a little if statement here. We'll say if obj.value is 0, then we'll just return. That just means exit the function at that point. So there we go, hit reset, so there's no zeros there. Okay, now we're going to go down to where we have our button. And we're going to add some look and feel here as well. So we'll do local laugh, btn reset, content.create local look and feel. And then we'll assign it to the button. And then let's see if the autocomplete works for me. So we're going to have laugh btn reset dot register function. Let's go register function. Draw toggle button. So this is a really easy one. We're going to get the area into a variable called A, as usual. We're going to set a variable called C to be the color we want to use, and we're going to use colors.with multiplied brightness. And the color is going to be the text color of the button. And the brightness, we're actually going to put this in parentheses here. We're going to say if the mouse is over the button, then we're going to use 1 for the brightness. Otherwise, we're going to use 0.8. But we're also going to subtract 0.2 multiplied by the value. And this is a momentary button, so the value is basically telling us if the button is currently being clicked. So basically this is just going to dim it a bit if we're clicking the button. So that's all that does. We'll do g.setColor, colors.withAlpha, and then the color is going to be C, so this one we've set up just here, and the alpha is going to be based on if the button's enabled or not. So if somebody's disabled the button for whatever reason, we're going to have it a bit dimmer. So it's 0.5 if it's disabled, or full opacity if it's enabled. We'll set our font, and then we'll draw the text. And the text is going to be the button's text, the area is going to be A, and the alignment is going to be left. And we'll hit F5, so there we go. Now let's just adjust the color of that. So keeping with this bluey, purpley mixture. Something vibrant, there we go. Okay, so let's zoom in on this if we can. So now when the mouse goes over, we can see it goes a bit lighter, and that's because of this. So object over, so when the mouse is over, use a brightness of 1. When the mouse isn't over, be a bit dimmer, 0.8. And then when we press down, it should subtract 0.2 from the brightness, and we should see it dim a little bit. So I'm going to click now, and it just dims a little bit. So it's just to give a little bit of feedback for the user. So full screen, it's very subtle, but it just gives a little bit of feedback so the user knows something's happening. So that's the UI. Obviously, this doesn't provide any functionality for microtuning. This just gives us an interface that we can use to get data from the user, essentially. So in the next video, we're going to make a standalone module for microtuning, and we're going to connect our UI script up to that module. So it's very important in HISE that you separate your UI, which is non-real-time, it's for user interaction. You separate that from real-time stuff like tuning notes as they're coming in. So we're going to make another module that runs in real-time, and this will just be the interface for the user to interact with. Okay, so this is a factory script we've been working on. So this function here, this function call, sorry, where we're actually triggering the script, that shouldn't be within the script. So let's just delete all the extra lines. So this is the script, and we'll hit F5, and obviously that changes because I removed the declaration. And we'll add that here instead, hit F5. So if you wanted to use this now in one of your projects, all you would have to do is include this script, microtuning panel, and then call the create function, passing in the various properties. Make sure you've already created the panel, obviously. And then you would get your microtuning panel. Now what we can do is, let's make this a bit smaller. Put that up there, hit F5, just make sure everything still fits. Yeah, so you can adapt this if you want. I've got it where you're specifying the width and the height of the slider pack, but you could change that if you wanted it to happen automatically based on the panel size or whatever. You can modify that in here. So let's add a second panel. And remember, the naming is important. It must start with PNL. So we'll call this micro tuning. No, I didn't want a capital T. Let's do that. Microtuning 2. And we'll make this one a bit bigger. Something like that. So the idea is that we can now call this function again, a second time, to create a second microtuning panel, if we want one. I don't know why we'd want more than one, but we could do. So the only difference is we're just changing the ID of our panel and the name of our variable. So I'll hit F5, and now we get a second one, and this one obviously has its own properties based on the component properties. Hit reset, it only applies to that one, and this one, it only applies to that one. So you can see those broadcasters are working, and we can see them here. So one broadcaster for each one. So it's a lovely way to create custom components using these factory methods. And it does take a bit of work, as you saw, to get it set up. But now that I've done this, it's something I would never need to do again. I might want to go in there and tweak it if I decide to make changes or whatever. But it's there. I can now use it in every single project for from now on. And it's just done. And all I have to do is call this one line of code. So it just really simplifies things. And it also makes it really easy to debug. If I know there's a problem with my microtuning panel, I just go to this script, and I know it's going to be in that script because that's the only place it could be. And there's just one function in there. So it just simplifies things so much. So I hope that was useful to you, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've made a microtuning UI in this video, but that isn't what the video is about. The video is about type safety, it's about factory functions, it's about broadcasters, it's about look and feel. It's about all these different techniques. So I don't want you to just take what I've done and just think that's good, okay, I can do this one thing and then wait for the next video. You should be able to take all the different elements from this and make your own thing, do something interesting with it, apply it in your own situation and to your own projects, because that's really what I'm hoping to get across, is how you can use all these different techniques. And this is just one example of those things. So if you do have any questions or comments about this, please leave them below the video or post them on the forum or Patreon. send me a message, that kind of thing. I'll be putting the snippet for this video on Patreon for my higher tier supporters as usual, and the next video that comes out will be how to make the microtuning module. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.